There are many people who want to avoid a very obvious truth. Many people who understand that the establishment is trying to cull us, that the establishment is trying to kill off huge swaths of humanity. Ivermectin is a depopulation agent being used against undesirables such as you and me, as well as billions of people in so-called third world countries, such as in Africa and in Central America. Now, many people don't want to admit this. Many people have been fooled and tricked into taking it themselves and recommending it to their friends and family. Yet many of these people are smart enough to know that there is a culling operation going on. There's a depopulation agenda going on. Many of these people have heard of the Kissinger Report to keep the world's population capped at 8 billion people. Many people understand that the new normal and depopulation match in all four major gematria ciphers. Many people are aware of the vast psychological operations and the huge number of PSYOP officers online trying to manipulate you into making foolish decisions. So I don't understand, why is there such a disconnect when it comes to one of the most obvious ways that we're being culled? And that is with terrible medical advice telling people to take an obvious depopulation agent. And I have study after study after study showing that it tanks the fertility of animals who take the drug. And that it's actually a cockroach poison. It's an animal poison. It kills animals at sufficient doses. But today what I want to focus on is the anti-fertility effects of ivermectin and the very similar abamectin. I've been yelling about this for months and months and months, probably multiple years now. Now, I've time and time again demanded a debate, demanded a conversation with these ivermectin Jim Jones characters. But they ghost me, they stonewall me, and they refuse to talk. So I'm going straight to the people. That's why I assembled the ultimate guide to understanding how ivermectin is the pinnacle of depopulation agents being used to cull truthers, conservatives, and poor people across the world. This is one of the highest tech depopulation agents on the market. It's subsidized out the wazoo. Merck sends it by the billions of doses to poor people around the world. It's sold super cheap on Amazon so that people can make the foolish decision of having a neutering agent sent to their doorstep to sterilize themselves, thinking that they're so smart. Somewhere, Satan is laughing his ass off. So we have a number of studies that show both decimated female fertility in animals and male fertility in animals. So we have a number of studies here. I want to start with this one. This is probably the most horrific study about ivermectin affecting female fertility in a hugely negative way. This is a rabbit study called Adverse Effects of Repeated Doses of Ivermectin, Alone or with Combination of Vitamin C, on Reproductive Systems of Female Rabbits, by Jawad et al. And I have these all linked up in the description down below. Researchers gave animals ivermectin and or vitamin C and measured how many offspring they beget. Here's a key quote from the paper. The results of fertility study revealed adverse effects of ivermectin therapy on fertility and blocking of the pregnancy in all treated groups except the fifth group, which administered vitamin C only as compared with control group. In conclusion, ivermectin has adverse effects on reproductive efficacy on female rabbits. Here we can see this in chart format. You can see the control group had 5 successful pregnancies, both in the first mating and the second mating attempt. When they added some vitamin C, that went up to 6 pregnancies in both the first and the second mating attempts. However, we see a huge drop-off when ivermectin is in the mix, both in terms of the number of pregnant female rabbits and the number of offspring they beget, especially in the first mating attempt, but also significantly down in the second mating attempt, 1 month later. And we'll show you the aggregate numbers in a second. But we can see 0 successful pregnancies. Of course, that means 0 offspring at all doses of ivermectin for the first mating attempt. That is horrific. A precipitous drop-off, plummeting to 0 when ivermectin is in the mix. This is why they're pushing it on us. I don't know how to make this any more clear. In the second mating attempt, only in the smallest dose of ivermectin, 0.5 milligrams per kilogram, were there any pregnancies. There was one pregnancy in the 0.5 milligrams per kilogram group of ivermectin in the second mating attempt, and two at that same dose plus 50 milligrams per kilogram vitamin C. So in the 0.5 milligrams per kilogram ivermectin group, the first mating attempt, 0 pregnancies. In the second mating attempt, just 1 pregnancy. When 50 milligrams per kilogram vitamin C was added to the same dose, 0.5 milligrams per kilogram ivermectin, still, in the first mating attempt, 0 pregnancies. In the second mating attempt, 2 pregnancies. So as I mentioned, 0 offspring in all of the first mating attempts when ivermectin is in the mix. This only slightly recovered at the smallest dose of ivermectin, whereby there were 3 offspring in the second mating attempt and 6 offspring when they added vitamin C to the mix. Now keep in mind that the FLCCC, in addition to recommending regular, recurring, prophylactic doses of ivermectin, they told people when they tested positive to start treating it early and fast. 0.4 to 0.6 milligrams per kilogram per day for 5 days. So keep that in mind, the mega doses that they were pushing. Also, they weren't telling people side effects. These ivermectin shills making the rounds on alternative poison cult media channels were not telling people the side effects, and they were telling people you won't die if you take this. They were telling people it was a miracle cure. And the problem with that, of course, is that people will buy it off Amazon and take way more than even these absurd megadoses that they were recommending on their website. Or people will look at the megadoses being recommended on the website and say, oh, let's take even more. That's probably a good idea. And that was over 5 days, back to back to back. 0.4 to 0.6 milligrams per kilogram per day for 5 days. In addition to telling people the absurdity that is to take clastogenic, fertility-destroying ivermectin to prevent damage from vax shedding from their loved ones and their coworkers and the general public. Then they were telling people, hey, the spike protein. You've got to detox from the spike protein. Take more ivermectin. Take these PGP inhibitors that enhance ivermectin's toxicity and the negative effects such as the fertility impairment. This is sick. Now, if we look at the aggregate data, we see that there's a 100% drop-off in the pregnancy rate for the first mating attempt, and it's still down 91% for the second mating attempt. And also keep in mind this is dose-dependent. So the more ivermectin, the more screwed people are. And then as far as the number of offspring, also down 100% in the first mating attempt and down 92% in the second mating attempt. And obviously the conclusion here, ivermectin has adverse effects on reproductive efficacy on female rabbits. Next, we have a rat study having to do with the closely related abamectin. This is the one that they found in the bacteria's poisonous defense mechanism in Japan that Merck turned into a drug called ivermectin. So very closely related. The study is called Abamectin-Induced Biochemical and Histopathological Changes in the Albino Rat. This is by Abd El-Hadi and Abu Algar. So in this next study, we're going to look at how there were fewer offspring when they dosed male rats with abamectin, which is very closely related to ivermectin. So the last study was looking at female-dosed rabbits and showing a huge drop-off in female fertility. In this study, we're seeing a huge drop-off in male fertility. Imagine if you combine the two. The study is called Abamectin-Induced Biochemical and Histopathological Changes in the Albino Rat by Abd El-Hadi and Abu Elgar. They found, quote, fertility was also significantly reduced in male rats ingesting abamectin in group T2. The number of offspring was significantly reduced. And they also found a number of other things that are concerning, such as histopathological changes were more intense in male rats from group T2 than those from group T1. And look at this huge drop-off in the number of offspring. Down 34% after 30-day exposure. They dosed them every week. And after 210 days of exposure, down 68% mean number of offspring. And we also see a big drop-off in the mean offspring weights, down 32%. Here's another study which looks at the effects of abamectin pesticide on male rats. The study was called Assessment of Anti-Fertility Activities of Abamectin Pesticide in Male Rats by Elbatia and Das. Quote, the number of viable fetuses was significantly reduced in females mated with males that ingested abamectin at 1.87 or 2.13 milligrams per animal per day. Significant increases in the total number of resorptions. But something that really needs to be accounted for is PGP, P-glycoprotein. I've talked about this extensively, but this changes the whole calculus of ivermectin toxicity. If people are taking caffeine, or if people are smoking weed, aka cannabinoids, THC, CBD, if people are taking K2, which a bunch of these shills push as well, if people are taking quercetin, if people are eating hot peppers, I believe also retinol, another toxic so-called vitamin, this will all increase the absorption of ivermectin. If people are drinking grapefruit juice, this will increase the absorption of ivermectin, causing similar effects as to if you had taken larger doses of ivermectin without these synergists, without these toxicity enhancers called PGP inhibitors. There are also genetic variables here, whereby some people have much less PGP protection by default. This is what concerns me so much, is the binary weapon aspect of all this. Because so many people are drinking caffeine. So many people are eating hot peppers. So many people are doing cannabinoids. So many people are taking K2, quercetin, retinol, etc., etc. Now let's look at the assessment of abamectin anti-fertility effects in male rats. This study is called Assessment of Anti-Fertility Activities of Abamectin Pesticide in Male Rats by Elbatia and Das. Quote, the number of viable fetuses was significantly reduced in females mated with males that ingested abamectin at 1.87 or 2.13 milligrams per animal per day. And this also reminds me, they were really trying to push inbreeding between the people who didn't take the vaccine but instead opted for the ivermectin, which is classic negative eugenics. And I'm very much against that. And I think it's very concerning that they were telling all these so-called undesirables, such as you and me, to take all these binary weapons, such as PGP inhibitors and ivermectin. And they were telling people, don't mate with the vaccinated. But what does that actually mean? Oh, well, just mate with yourselves while you die off, while you get cold. I mean, just study the history of eugenics, folks. So this is one of the most concerning findings in the study. Quote, significant increases in the total number of resorptions. That's not a good thing. And the number of females with resorptions were observed in females mated with the exposed males at all three concentrations. Testicular sperm counts and daily sperm production were significantly decreased in exposed males. And here you can see these horrific findings in table format. They have the control group here, tap water, 18 out of 18 pregnant females, 100%. For the 1.19 milligrams per animal per day abamectin, this goes down to 60% successful pregnancy rate. Then when they increase it to 1.87 milligrams per animal per day, down to 58.3%. And here you can see this in chart format. And while there's a little bit of a boost from 1.87 to 2.13 milligrams per day abamectin, you can see when it comes time to count how many fetuses come out that are viable, you can see by this measurement, it's actually still worse. The number of viable fetuses versus abamectin dose, you can see for 1.19 milligrams per day, it's down 15.6%. For 1.87 milligrams per day, down 21.3% versus the control. And then for 2.13, the number of viable fetuses down 27.7%. And again, this does not take into account how so many people are inhibiting their PGP with PGP inhibitors that are being pushed in tandem with this ivermectin genocide. And look at this. This is one of the most startling charts. This is the percent of animals with reabsorptions for each of the abamectin treatment groups. For 1.19 milligrams per day, up 500%. The percentage of animals with reabsorptions, up 500%. For 1.87 milligrams per day, up 414.4%. And for 2.13 milligrams of abamectin per day, up 543.2%. This is staggering. And we have lots of microscopy analysis of ivermectin versus no ivermectin. And it's very concerning, especially when you read the captions. Cross-section of the seminiferous tubules in the testes of an abamectin-treated rat, showing A, increased amount of interstitial connective tissue, and in B, congested blood vessels. So that's A and B. And then down here, this is the control group without these same issues. Quote, the results presented in this study clearly demonstrate that ingestion of abamectin for 6 weeks induced adverse effects on male fertility and reproduction. Quote, histological evaluation of the testes revealed several abnormalities, including infiltration with congested blood vessels, with marked hemorrhage, and a significant accumulation of connective tissue surrounding the seminiferous tubules. These results strongly suggest the adverse effects of abamectin pesticide on male rat fertility. The pregnancy rate and the number of viable fetuses were significantly reduced in females impregnated by abamectin-exposed males. Similar studies have indicated a strong link between male infertility and exposure to more than 50 pesticides, including abamectin. This is sourced to a 1996 study by Cox, and then another study from 1990, published in the US EPA publication, found that rats given just 0.04 milligrams per kilogram per day abamectin had increased stillbirths, decreased pup viability, decreased lactation, and decreased pup weights. Quote, ingestion of abamectin caused a significant reduction in both epididymal and testicular sperm counts in a dose-dependent manner. So pretty clear what caused it. In summary, our results strongly suggest that exposure to the pesticide abamectin would have adverse effects on fertility and reproduction in adult male rats. Our next study is called Toxicological and Pathological Studies of Ivermectin on Male Albino Rats by Elizagbe et al., whereby the researchers examined sperm count and the percentage of abnormal sperm of white albino rats given ivermectin. And they found, of course, a decrease in sperm count and an increase in the percentage of abnormal sperm. Look at this huge nosedive, this huge drop-off. The 24-hour sperm count down 57% with a single dose of ivermectin, and down 66% with a double dose of ivermectin. So it's not just female fertility, it's also male fertility that plummets, that gets wrecked, that gets destroyed. And then at the 7-day mark, it's still down 6% for single dose ivermectin. And for double dose of ivermectin, it's down 52% still. So no wonder they were giving out these mega doses. And remember, the FLCCC, the disgusting group that shills poison and then on their website, says, by reading our website, you agree to hold us harmless. They're pushing 0.4 to 0.6 milligrams per kilogram per day for 5 days. So that's up to a triple dose 5 days in a row. And then they were also pushing it for all this absurdity, vac shedding, spike protein, all this bullshit coming out of the ivermectin camp. Quote, significant decrease in total sperm count with significant increase in sperm abnormality was also demonstrated. So every time somebody tested positive, they were throwing people on these insane protocols. And by the way, look at this meta-analysis by this doctor here on Twitter. For ivermectin versus the control, with roughly the same number of people in the groups, for severe adverse effects, grade 3 or higher, there were 5 times more in the ivermectin arms than in the control arm. That's horrifying. Also horrifying are the percentage increases in sperm abnormalities at 24 hours and 7 days. up 207% 24 hours after, up 24% 7 days after for the single dose, and up 88% for the double dose of ivermectin 7 days after. Quote, consequently, it could be concluded that it is not preferable to use ivermectin, particularly at double therapeutic doses, mostly to breeding males. But that's all they looked at here, by the way. We saw earlier with the female rabbit study, it doesn't seem to bode too much better for female animals. The next rabbit study we're going to look at is called Pathological Studies on Effects of Ivermectin on Male and Female Rats by Gabala et al. All of these are linked up in my article, linked down below. Ivermectin has adverse effect on male rabbits that received either therapeutic or double therapeutic doses that varied from mild degenerative changes to complete necrosis of spermatogenic cells, so sperm-making cells, with complete absence of sperms. Meanwhile, female genital systems were severely affected, showing severe degeneration and hemorrhage in uterus and atritic follicles, and degenerated ova in ovaries. Additionally, ivermectin induced mild reversible pathological changes in parenchymatous organs of rabbits at therapeutic dose for short period of administration. And they also looked at the histopathological results, which revealed, quote, mild to moderate reversible degenerative changes in examined organs of male rabbits who received ivermectin weekly for 4 weeks. Meanwhile, this degeneration became more severe and extended to complete necrosis in some organs after a longer period and higher doses of ivermectin administration. Hence why they're giving people higher doses of ivermectin. These fucking bastards. Quote, pregnant females suffered from abortion, in some cases with fetal death. So this right-wing group who pretends to be anti-abortion are out there pretending like this abortion pill is a magic cure. Shame. Shame. Baby killers. Quote, female genital system was severely affected that showed severe degeneration and hemorrhage in the uterus, as well as atritic follicles and degenerated ova in ovaries. Maybe that's why in the other rabbit study, we saw fertility plummet to 0% of the control values. This is a microscopy slide showing testes of male rabbits who received 0.8 milligrams per kilogram ivermectin for 4 weeks. And they show the presence of multiple sperm giant cells. In figure 2 on the right, testes of male rabbit who received 0.4 milligrams per kilogram body weight for 8 weeks, showing vacuolation in the cytoplasm of spermatogenic cells with picotic nucleus. Here's figure 3, epididymis of male rabbit receiving 0.4 milligrams per kilogram body weight, ivermectin for 8 weeks, showing accumulation of necrotic sperms, and some of them hyalinized together with mononuclear leucitic infiltration in the epididymal tubules. This is really graphic here. Feti of pregnant does that received daily ivermectin at doses of 0.4 milligrams per kilogram body weight, slaughtered at 28th day of pregnancy, showing stunted growth, which is something we see in study after study, smaller offspring. In figure 14, the ovary of pregnant does that received daily ivermectin at 0.4 milligrams per kilogram and slaughtered at the 28th day of pregnancy, showing multiple degenerated and atritic follicles scattered on the ovarian stroma. The next study we're going to look at is called Abamectin pesticide exposure in male infertility. Human exposure studies supported by animal studies point out a considerable relationship. By Selick Onzensi et al., the researchers examined a very similar pesticide to ivermectin, abamectin. Abamectin levels in plasma, testes, liver, and adipose tissues increased substantially in LTG and HTGs. So those acronyms stand for low toxicity group and high toxicity group, which are the two groups of treatment for these rats, the different poisoning levels. Besides normal appearance, germinal epithelium revealed presence of marked depletion of germ cells and occurrence of multinucleated giant cells. Sperm motility and pregnancy rates decreased significantly in experimental group rats. High plasma abamectin levels were found in infertile farmers. Quote, percentage of sperm with normal chromatin, membranous and cytoplasmic maturity, and sperm motility decreased in infertile men. Quote, abamectin exists at high concentrations in testes of male rats, and decreased pregnancy rates indicate a relationship between abamectin and male infertility. Tubule damage and decreased sperm motility may explain this effect. Sperm motility, sperm maturity, markers of farmers exposed to abamectin were negatively affected. Thus, abamectin exposure can contribute to male infertility. No wonder this was pushed on the conservatives. In a study called Effects of Ivermectin and its Combination with Alpha-lipoic acid, an expression of these genes here in male rat fertility. We're going to focus on the male rat fertility measurements. This was a study by El Madawi and Nabi. The researchers looked into ivermectin and changes in fertility metrics and expression of two genes in rat testes. Again, this does not take into account that many people are inhibiting their PGP with substances like caffeine, marijuana, CBD, THC, K2, quercetin, hot peppers, retinol, etc., etc. So there's a 22% drop-off of testosterone, a 42% drop-off of sperm count when ivermectin is introduced, a 25% drop-off in sperm motility, and a 65% increase in sperm abnormalities. There's an interesting measurement which takes into account the sperm count times the sperm motility, which gives an idea of how many viable sperm there are. And we see a massive drop-off, 56.5% less in terms of the motile count. Quote, low level of intratesticular testosterone may lead to detachment of germ cells in seminiferous epithelium and initiate germ cell apoptosis and subsequent male infertility. That's citing a study from 1998 from Blanco Rodriguez and Martinez Garcia. From the sperm count and sperm motility measurements, we can approximate the drop of total motility. That's what we just talked about, down 56.5%. They also have more microscopy. Here's a picture of a control animal. Then once ivermectin is thrown in, you can just see the degeneration. Quote, where C, seminiferous tubules, so it's talking about right here on the left, C, for ivermectin group, showing severe vacuolation of germinal epithelium, degeneration with an absence of spermatoza, that's what the arrows are pointing at, and interstitial edema, that's the arrowhead right here, and D, that's on the right here for ivermectin, showing disorganized seminiferous tubules with severe vacuolation of germinal epithelium and degeneration arrows with interstitial edema, shown by the arrows and the arrowhead respectively. We also have this study which shows that ivermectin makes female rats engage in less sexual behavior. The study is called Ivermectin Reduces Sexual Behavior in Female Rats by Moreira, Bernardi, and Spinoza. Researchers found a stark decline in female sexual behavior in rats after dosing them with ivermectin. So on the left, these four charts on the left have to do with sexual behavior induced by estradiol valerate, which is a synthetic form of estradiol, which is a hormone, a type of estrogen. And so behavior induced by estradiol valerate refers to the actions or reactions exhibited by an animal, in this case female rats, after being treated with estradiol valerate. This hormone can induce estrous, aka reproductive behaviors, affecting sexual activity. And then on the right, these four charts look at behavior induced by inestrus, which is more of a cyclical thing, the estrus phase of the reproductive cycle. So what we can see here are big drop-offs in sexual behavior, probably because they've been poisoned and are dealing and coping with the toxicity. But you can see dose-dependent drop-offs, lordosis quotient, lordosis intensity, exaggerated lordosis, and female presenting lordosis. Lordosis is a mating posture in many female mammals where the back is arched downward to facilitate copulation. Lordosis quotient is a measure used in studies to quantify the frequency of lordosis behavior in response to a male's advances. It is typically calculated as the number of lordosis responses divided by the number of male mounting attempts. Lordosis intensity refers to the degree or strength of the lordosis posture during each occurrence, measured by the angle of spinal curvature or the overall robustness of the posture. Exaggerated lordosis is a term that describes an unusually pronounced or extreme lordosis posture, which might be indicative of a heightened sexual receptivity or a specific reaction to hormonal treatments like estradiol. Next, we have this horrific study where dosed Nigerian men saw a plummeting total motile count, which again takes into account the number of sperm in total and the percentage of them that are moving. This is a study called Effects of Ivermectin Therapy on the Sperm Functions of Nigerian Onchocerciasis Patients. We observed significant reduction in the sperm counts and sperm motility of the patients tested. On the morphology, there was significant increase in the number of abnormal sperm cells. This took the form of 2 heads, double tails, white sperm, as in albino, and extraordinarily large heads. It is suspected that the above alterations in the already determined parameters of the patient's sperm cells could only have occurred as a result of their treatment with ivermectin. And also keep in mind the doses that people were pushing recently on conservatives dwarf the amounts that were being given to Africans for so-called onchocerciasis. Quote, there was a significant drop in the sperm counts of the patients after their treatment with ivermectin. And we can see this in the scatter plot here. So pre-ivermectin is on the x-axis, post-ivermectin is on the y-axis. Anything below that line is bad. That indicates a drop-off in the sperm count. But this isn't actually the worst part. In most of these studies, we see a moderate drop-off in the sperm count. I mean, this is pretty bad. But what's especially bad is the percentage of sperm that are moving goes down tons. So there's just a bunch of dead sperm or hardly moving sperm. Here's a chart of all the individual data points. The blue is pre-ivermectin, the red is post-ivermectin. But this is where it gets really ugly, really scary. Sperm motility drop-off. Quote, there was a significant drop in the sperm counts of patients after their treatment with ivermectin. There was also a significant reduction in the motility of the cells after their treatment with ivermectin. So sperm motility is the percentage of sperm that can swim normally forward, which of course is a requisite for a sperm to successfully fertilize an egg. So again, here's a scatter plot. Now we can see the horrific effects of ivermectin on the percentage of moving sperm. This is horrific. All these points down below the line, except for one on the line and one a little bit over the line. This indicates a huge wrecking of male fertility. And here's the chart. Pre and post ivermectin, blue and red respectively, sperm motility for each of the patients studied. Now keep in mind, we talked about how there are differences in genetic PGP protection. Africans average much higher PGP protection than white Europeans. And again, study after study shows us this percentage of abnormal sperm spiking, massively increasing after ivermectin. And we see that again in this study. All these points in red here above the line, except for this one point down below, showing patients having much more abnormal sperm after their ivermectin treatment. And then again on the patient basis here. And then if we multiply the number of sperm in the sample times the percentage that were swimming properly, we can estimate something akin to a total motile count. And we can see the massive drop-off here. Here's a study where they exposed rosy barb fish sperm to ivermectin. And we see a dose-dependent decimation of what percentage of the sperm are swimming. So this has been confirmed in a number of different ways. Quote, this indicates that the toxicity of ivermectin to rosy barb sperm is both dose-dependent and exposure time dependent. So it really seems like ivermectin kills life, right? It's a toxic bacteria defense mechanism. Here's another study looking at mice. called The Effect of Ivermectin on Male Fertility and Its Interaction with P-glycoprotein Inhibitor, in this case verapamil, in rats. And I believe verapamil is also a CYP3A4 inhibitor, which is the enzyme that breaks down ivermectin. So if you inhibit PGP or if you inhibit CYP3A4, and then if you take ivermectin, you're going to have a much larger absorption of said ivermectin. Because your detox pathways, which are desperately trying to rid your brain of this crap, rid your testes of this crap, rid your placenta of this crap, are unable to cope because they've been inhibited. They've been shut down. And interestingly, in many of the ivermectin studies recently, they forbid people from taking even grapefruit juice, which decimates the CYP3A4. It also, I think, inhibits PGP, but I'm not as sure about that. They also forbid in these studies people to take PGP inhibitors. So what's interesting about this study is we see the drop-off in sperm count for ivermectin. And so they gave 0.3 milligrams per kilogram body weight once a week. So much less than the human patients are receiving, for 8 weeks. And then interestingly, they had this other group here, which actually, for the first time in all the studies we've seen, accounts for this PGP protection, which is going to prevent the ivermectin from wreaking havoc unless it's inhibited chemically, which is why I think they're pushing all these PGP inhibitors on the people they're trying to depopulate, the undesirables. And so that's what really jumps out in this study here. Is there's a 12% reduction in the sperm count of the ivermectin group. But when the animals were given PGP inhibitors, down 46%. And for sperm motility, down 8% for ivermectin alone, and down 23% ivermectin and verapamil. And I think of all the people who are drinking coffee, eating hot peppers, eating curcumin, taking K2, taking quercetin, taking retinol, aka vitamin A, it's a recipe for disaster. And it's something that is never mentioned. In fact, all these shills are pushing PGP inhibitors as well. So it's likely that people who fall for the ivermectin scam also are falling for the binary weapons that enhance its toxicity and its anti-fertility effects. Also, anybody who smokes marijuana, anybody on cannabinoids, CBD or THC, caffeine, as I mentioned, which are a lot of people. So again, PGP is linked to the integrity of blood tissue barriers, such as the blood-brain barrier, testes, or placenta, and a partial blockade of PGP could be responsible for a new drug distribution in the organism, with possible increases in drug rates in organs behind these barriers. Therefore, concomitant administration of substrates and PGP inhibitors would modify drug pharmacokinetics by increased bioavailability and organ uptake. Yet, is this warning ever passed along? Hell no. In fact, it's purposefully being exploited to disastrous outcomes. And the anti-fertility effects are just a part of this. It's the key focus of this video, but I'm also extremely concerned about lowering of lifespan, people falling into comas or dying outright. Here's some more information about genetic differences in this TT-MDR1 gene. So MDR1 is multi-drug resistance, which is a detox mechanism which protects us from toxins. Cancer researchers dubbed it multi-drug resistance because they were having a hard time killing certain cells, namely cancer cells. But this also applies to other cells in the body. They were just so laser focused or corrupt that they couldn't be bothered to see, do the other cells protect themselves with PGP? So they tried to just inhibit people's PGP while they gave them toxic chemotherapy, because in a petri dish, they were able to kill cells faster, kill the cancer cells faster by wearing down their detox mechanisms and then toxifying them with chemotherapy. The problem is you can find numerous papers saying that this did not bode well because the PGP inhibition was not specific, so it wore down other key protections in the body, leading to bad clinical outcomes. So here's one such paper. P-glycoprotein in cancer, what do we currently know? Given its clinical importance, it was hypothesized that the inhibition of P-glycoprotein and other ABC transporters could result in the reversal of the MDR phenotype in patients. However, the results observed in vitro could not be replicated clinically because those that have been deployed all led to varying degrees of toxicity. No inhibitor has been shown to safely and completely reverse MDR in human clinical trials, especially due to issues with pharmacokinetic or pharmacodynamic interactions and toxicities. And one more quote from the paper. Despite successful attempts of MDR reversal in cell culture settings, the shortcoming in the clinical setting is associated with low specificity and high toxicity levels. The toxicity can be interpreted as a result of the dosage required for PGP inhibition that leads to unacceptable side effects due to non-selective distribution in the body upon delivery, as well as the co-administration with anti-cancer drugs, which may be noxious. So they had to regroup and say, okay, maybe we can focus the PGP inhibitors on a certain part of the body, as in trying to target the tumor directly. So what does that tell us? I think it tells us a lot. But check this out. There's different studies over the years which looked at various populations and measured the genotypes associated with enhanced PGP protection, aka multi-drug resistance. I mean, you could call it multi-toxin resistance. I think that'd be a better name. And one of the drugs that's being resisted in MDR is ivermectin. But what's interesting here is if we look at, say, Kenyan and Ghanaian, we see there's practically zero of this least protected group, TT, which is the recessive allele for both of the two. Compare that, say, with German Caucasian, 24% have the alleles for the least amount of PGP protection. And then they could also likely be drinking coffee or smoking weed or taking K2 or retinol, etc., etc., etc. Quercetin. And then also this middle group is interesting. We also see large amounts of lessened protection, but not quite the least protection. So C/T is less protection than C/C, but still a little bit more than T/T. And so if you add these up, you see that Africans are blessed with way more PGP protection, generally, than white Europeans. And there are groups that are even more predisposed, such as Southwest Asians in this study, 38% C/T, 47% T/T. And then back to the rat study, now that we're actually accounting for PGP inhibition. Let's look at some aspects of sperm generation, the sperm life cycle. You can see in the chart here the different stages, the different divisions. And look at this extremely concerning chart. When the PGP is inhibited and the ivermectin is administered, all of these abnormal sperm metrics shoot through the roof. Next, let's look at a sheep study, which finds a huge drop-off in the sperm concentration and the sperm motility. This is a study called An Investigation of the Effects of Ivermectin on Blood Serum, Semen Hyaluronidase Activities, and Spermatological Characteristics in Sheep by Taniel Deasy and Boskert. All of these are linked up if you want to read them. Here's a quote from the paper. In this study, the values of sperm motility and concentration were observed to decrease significantly with the p-value of less than 0.01 when compared with the control groups. And I put this into a chart. So you can see the blue line is the sperm concentration control, and the red line is the sperm concentration over time after the ivermectin administration at T0. So it's trending downward, and it's way, way underneath the control levels. I put this into an easier to read chart here. Sperm concentration versus time. You have the control in blue on the left, and then 1 hour, 24 hours, 48 hours, etc. And you can see these huge reductions. Just 1 hour in, it's down 26.4%. 24 hours in, down 30.5%. Way down at 48 hours, down 54.5%. And then it ends up 264 hours in at the lowest point, down 65.3%. And then here's the sperm motility chart over time. The control on the left shows maybe 76, 77% sperm motility is the baseline. And you can see this huge precipitous drop-off where at many points it's now below 50%. And of course, I think one of the biggest smoking guns is that they ship, just like they shipped DDT, they ship ivermectin in huge, massive quantities for free to some of the countries that have been most targeted by genocidal maniacs for depopulation because they have large populations that are rapidly growing. So Merck, a well-hated company, decided that, hey, rather than diagnose and treat individual members like a good doctor would do, let's just make a decision to initiate annual treatment with ivermectin based on performing a survey of the community to determine what proportion has palpable onchocercal nodules. Wink, wink. Yeah, I'm sure they're really doing that. So they can just decide at a community level, okay, you guys have to take this poison that decimates fertility. Look here. Once a threshold level of onchocerciasis is diagnosed in this manner, the entire community of eligible recipients is given annual therapy, annual mass treatment. And when you read into the history of ivermectin, it just becomes so obvious what's going on. Merck had to decide how to use this discovery. It first proposed selling ivermectin at a price based on market conditions. They were trying to get $3 for it. But the people who could benefit from this medicine were the least able to pay. Next, it tried to find third-party payers such as the US government and international organizations, but was unsuccessful, even though it offered to discount the price to $1. Abandoning the drug was unattractive both in terms of health benefits denied to suffering people in Africa and in terms of characteristics of Merck and its situation, its corporate culture, blah, blah, blah. And then Merck finally chose in 1987 to donate the drug to all who need it for as long as needed. And by the way, I found this document on the World Bank's website, the Mecticin Donation Program, worldbank.org. They also put out really creepy propaganda about this. We need to finish the job.
Once upon a time, there was a fly born in African rivers. And to live, it had to bite humans. Something had to be done about trapping people in poverty. Something had to be done about this little fly. 1974. Something was done. Using helicopters, spraying insecticides into rivers in 11 African countries. It was called the Onchocerciasis Control Program. Where it was tried, it worked. The disease stopped spreading. People returned to farm. But the existing infections carried on. 1990. 11 of 30 countries had been treated. 19 more countries to go. Then a drug used to fight heartworm in dogs is re-examined. Turns out, in people, it works like a miracle on river blindness, killing the larvae, preventing new infections, stopping the itching immediately, putting an end to infected people going blind. Merck donates all the pills needed to control the disease. Just 1 or 2 pills a year per person, no exceptions.
No exceptions. That is horrifying to me. And they've clearly expanded this genocidal campaign to conservatives and truth seekers, anti-vaxxers. And I find this video extremely concerning as well. This is a professor at some school spilling the beans about ivermectin and other pesticides used, sprayed into the rivers. Listen to this.
Now, so how do we go ahead and deal with the controlling the disease? First of all, the first approach is you control the vector. So the idea was if you could stop the transmission of the black flies to humans, over time, the human reservoir would decrease, people would die, And and this is really sort of the same approach that was done with AIDS. Before you had drugs that can control AIDS, the idea you stop the transmission by stopping risky behaviors, and then gradually the reservoir would decrease. Then, of course, they developed the antiviral drugs. The parasite, unfortunately, lives a long time, 9 to 11 years in the human body. So you really need a long time to actually have growth. And the way they did this was by applying insecticides to control the black flies. Everything else that was attempted, biological control, everything that was tried, nothing worked except these insecticides. And the vastness of this program is unbelievable. Every week, 35,000 miles of rivers were sprayed with insecticides, in some cases for 20 years, to try to control these biting flies. And so what happens is, using helicopters throughout this region, 35,000 miles of rivers were sprayed. Here's an application of pesticides. Natural selection, and a particular type of natural selection, which Dr. Holzenbeck mentioned, called directional selection. It's pushing them in one direction, okay? So, know it by Monday, okay? So that's one of the things that we found, is that you have to manage for resistance to avoid this insecticide resistance. Okay, and how does this work? Well, here's the black fly. It's got these little fans here. It's laying back in the water, and all these particles that it feeds on are passing over it, and all we do is make sure that the insecticide is in a particle, so that as it passes over, it catches it in the fans, eats it, and then dies. So that's really the very, very simple mechanism of doing this. Okay, but just quickly, the other approach is you control the parasite, the strategy of chemotherapy. So ivermectin, and any of you ever heard of ivermectin? Ivermectin is a veterinary drug that if any of you had a dog that had dog heartworm, you gave the dog ivermectin. Ivermectin is a veterinary drug. This suddenly, about 20 years ago, it's approved to use in humans. So now we can distribute it to humans. It only kills the larvae. It doesn't kill the adults at all. And the idea was to give an annual dose to everybody in West Africa who was over 5 years old. And the drugs were donated by Merck, a big drug company that's always in trouble with some of its products. But they've actually donated for years drugs for free. So what we did in our program is we distributed drugs to almost 7 million people a year. And we did this using volunteers, teachers, village-based healthcare workers. And one of the things that was kind of interesting, although volunteers implies that you don't give them any money for this, is that the Dutch government gave us money to give us like a reward or a thank you for the volunteers, because they would spend their own time going out and distributing these drugs. And so we thought, well, we'll just divide the money up and we'll give everybody $5 or $10, whatever it is, which is a lot considering that the household income is about $250 a year.
And so I think it's very important to point out what's happening here. In 1974, in a secret government document, Kissinger spearheaded the World Population Plan of Action under Nixon's presidency, which is nothing short of an atrocious secret government document talking about capping the world's population at 8 billion. This was official government policy in the U.S. World policy and programs in the population field should incorporate two major objectives. Look at the second. Actions to keep the ultimate level as close to 8 billion, rather than permitting it to reach 10 billion. The U.S. offered to collaborate with other interested donor countries and organizations. For example, the WHO, the UNFPA, the World Bank, and UNICEF, to encourage further action by lesser developed countries' governments and other institutions to provide low-cost, basic preventative health services. Blah, 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 right? Concentration on key countries. Assistance for population moderation should give primary emphasis to the largest and fastest growing developing countries. These countries are, and this was back in 1974, so this list changes: India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nigeria, Mexico, Indonesia, Brazil, the Philippines, Thailand, Egypt, Turkey, Ethiopia, and Colombia. Bilateral assistance, to the extent that funds are available, will be given to other countries, considering such factors as population growth, etc. At the same time, the U.S. will look to the multilateral agencies, especially the UN Fund for Population Activities, which already has projects in over 80 countries, to increase population assistance with increased U.S. contributions. This is desirable in terms of U.S. interests and necessity in political terms in the United Nations. By the way, the United Nations have had multiple population conferences and have teamed up with the likes of Margaret Sanger, who has some really insidious quotes about black people. The World Population Plan of Action is not self-enforcing and will require vigorous efforts by interested countries, UN agencies, and other international bodies to make it effective. Yet you're telling me that they're going out of their way to spend all their funds to save a bunch of lives in Africa, to heal river blindness. Gotta be a fool. So if you look at where Merck and the so-called Task Force for Global Health are sending all of these billions of ivermectin pills, it becomes crystal clear what's going on. So there's a Merck article which claims that they've sent 4.4 billion doses. Here's a list of the countries that receive or have received ivermectin donations from Merck. And some should jump off the page here. Nigeria, Brazil, Guinea, Mexico, Thailand, Venezuela. I'm trying to remember which countries we were looking at earlier. Ethiopia, Colombia. There's a huge overlap in these two lists. And if you just think about the types of countries and the socioeconomics of it, these closely match the different target groups of Kissinger's Worldwide Population Plan of Action, aka the Genocidal Declaration. And then here's some more information from a 2015 WHO report about where the ivermectin tablets are going. You can see these huge numbers here for Nigeria, for instance, the DRC, Uganda, Cameroon. So I hope everybody sees this obvious connection and can put two and two together. Now, who is helping Merck send all these pills for free? The Task Force for Global Health. Who are they? The task force works in partnership with ministries of health and hundreds of organizations, including major pharmaceutical companies that donate billions of dollars annually in essential medicines. The major funders include the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the CDC, the WHO, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the Beaumont Foundation, United States Agency for International Development, Sightsavers, Pfizer, Merck & Co., Johnson & Johnson, and GlaxoSmithKline. I'll just share this one last image here. This is an actual product being sold on Amazon. Cockroach poison, abamectin. Active ingredient, abamectin, 0.05%. Delivers 100% mortality. So they tricked conservatives to chug cockroach poison and to push it on their loved ones and their friends. Shame on the ivermectin shills. Shame on anybody who's still trying to mislead people into taking this crap. And I hope people will debate me on this. Here's my email. Try to get your favorite ivermectin-pushing Jim Jones piece of shit to grow some balls and debate me. And you'll see they'll ignore you, they'll divert, they'll push you away, and ultimately they're just plain dumb. It's my contention that they are purposefully pushing depopulation agents on us for the reason of depopulation.